What happened to the rest of the 2018-2019 Winnipeg Jets after they finished their tenure in Winnipeg? Let's find out on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we are continuing our series of the Where Are They At Now, focusing on the 2018-2019 Winnipeg Jets team, a couple of players that are maybe familiar, maybe some names that you've forgotten, and I also want to talk a little bit about JFresh's standings projections, because his model last year was pretty high on the Jets, and this year it's taken a little bit of a hit. Given the offseason, I don't think any of you are going to be surprised by this, but Winnipeg is not in first in his model in either the Central or the NHL. So we'll find out just where the Jets sit in his model, how much they've fallen or perhaps not fallen, all coming up on tonight's episode. But before we do, I did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So, 2018-2019, not exactly the greatest of Jets seasons. We all remember this as the year where the Jets brought in a certain player from the Rangers who ended up getting put on the fourth line despite being offensively more of like a second-line center. This was one of Maurice's final years, and at this point, after the amazing 17-18 season, the Jets in 18-19 were still pretty decent, but things started to fall apart a little bit after that amazing year. The Jets definitely had some good acquisitions at the trade deadline, but, you started looking at what was going on under the hood and some emerging problems in the locker room, and really 18-19 was kind of the start of the downfall of the Maurice era. So, a lot of rough memories, but we still had a couple of players we really enjoyed watching. And of course, one of those guys, it was Patrik Laine. Laine, of course, had a couple of years after this one, but it wasn't long until he ended up leaving Winnipeg and wanting to move elsewhere. We all remember him being traded for Pierre-Luc Dubois, which Dubois also not with Winnipeg anymore. But Laine, for his time with the Jets, was a very fun player. One of the most fun players we've ever gotten to watch. I still will always have a soft spot for him. I know that offensively and at 5v5, he's kind of on the rough side these days. But if ever you were looking at a dude who could absolutely rip the puck into the back of the net for a power play goal, it was always Laine, right? Patty was, for me, one of the most entertaining draft picks we've ever had. It's a shame that his 5v5 game and speed ended up being a real problem at the NHL level. And at this stage of his career, I think it's definitely been pretty noticeable that even in his current team, he's been on the fourth line. But again, I still have a soft spot for him. He's also had some very serious struggles with his mental health, with his physical health as well. It's just been a real, how do I put this, like a real journey, I think, for him, and a real trial at times to really stick around in the league, and things have been a little up and down. But even still, after leaving the Jets in 2021, he's been with the Columbus Blue Jackets for a while, and then just this past season ended up moving to Montreal as part of their sort of gamble to overhaul their roster, slightly speed up the rebuild, and they really didn't pay too much for Laine just because his contract is still very expensive. So more than anything, it's the cap space that they ended up paying for him. Past couple of years, it's been, again, very rough. He hasn't played a ton of games, around 55-ish per year, which isn't a lot. And in those games, again, the 5v5 play has kind of fallen off. He can still smack the puck really hard. And in his Blue Jackets years, he had a couple of seasons where he was about a point per game while he was healthy. The Canadians' tenure hasn't exactly been as kind, but even in 50 games, he still scored 20 goals. So The goal scoring ability definitely still there, still an amazing power play specialist. One day, just for the vibes, it'd be cool if he would ever come back to the Jets on a cheaper deal, but obviously that's probably not going to happen. I think that's probably chalked off for now, unless there's a big surprise and maybe one day he does return. I kind of feel like having the prodigal son home. I know that for a lot of reasons, his on-ice performance may not be amazing, but just for the vibes, it'd be cool to see him again in a Winnipeg uniform. Not sure how about how a lot of you feel about that. Probably disagree. Probably never want to see him again. But again, I'll always still have a soft spot for him. Another guy on this team that didn't exactly get along with Maurice, and certainly for whatever reason did not earn the trust of the coaching staff, it was Kevin Hayes. And Hayes was kind of like this really solid middle six center with great goal scoring ability and some pretty nifty offensive chops. But for whatever reason, when he came to Winnipeg, he just could not get out of the coach's doghouse. Some of it, I think, was because he was a little bit soft on the puck and defensively not exactly the most astute player. But, for a guy who put up 12 points in 20 games and got relegated to fourth line duty, I really feel like the Jets sort of whiffed on this usage, right? Like, he was legitimately a great middle six / even second line center, a guy who can score and, drive offense and be skilled enough to be a capable attacking minded player in, Maurice's system. Not getting a lot of ice time really didn't make a lot of sense. And look, Hayes definitely had some more than cosmetic issues, but I feel like the Jets just really wasted the assets bringing him in because for whatever reason, Maurice and the coaching staff just hated him. They would not play him. And so looking at what he's done in the intervening years, he had quite a bit of a run with the Flyers. They were generally pretty decent, but he wasn't exactly scoring a lot. And obviously COVID plus his own physical health, there were some injuries and sort of the COVID shortened seasons, which have been a little bit hard for him to work around. But most recently he was with the Blues and now the Pittsburgh Penguins last season. So he's still getting around. I don't know how many more seasons he really has. He's 33 now. That's getting up there in years for a player. And so I don't know how many more seasons he'll be active, but he's carved out a nice middle six role for himself and keeps getting paid a fair bit of money. That's always cool to see, former Jets getting paid. I will always endorse it, even if I don't, see myself as a big fan of the player, but I really wish Hayes' tenure had gone differently. It was, for me, a bit of a missed opportunity. The last guy that I want to talk about a little bit, this one's an interesting one because I've mentioned him before. Technically, he is still considered in Winnipeg's system. Actually, I think his rights might have just expired, but it's Christian Vesalainen. Vesalainen, for the last several years, has been overseas in Finland. We all kind of remember him as the player who, in many ways, I think was miscast. You look at what he's done in Liga, and this guy is really an offensively minded player, right? His points totals may not look like they're jumping off the page, but generally speaking, he's been a noted attacking minded player with a great shot and release. He's not exactly the swiftest skater, but he's a creative passer. He's a dynamic, forward with some great vision and spatial awareness. And for whatever reason, the Jets tried to turn him into a really big power forward. And I don't really feel like that was ever his game. Looking at his Liga performance again, recently it's kind of been so-so. He's putting up 35 points a season, which is not exactly outstanding. But I wonder if you'd gone back and maybe tried to approach his development differently, how it would have gone with the Jets, right? Could Winnipeg have maybe done something differently than what we saw under Maurice? And, we'll never really know now because he's not coming back. And at this point, I don't know that there's really a lot of value in it. But if a team was willing to get, maybe give him a shot and take a punt, he's still only 26. And I think that he could actually serve as an interesting middle six bet. So one day it might not shock me if he does come back to the NHL. We'll have to see on that one. But it's a shame that, the Jets really couldn't hack it. We'll have to see. But, of course, it wasn't just, forwards that were on this team that maybe didn't exactly pan out. We've also had quite a few defenders who got a cup of tea with the Jets, and maybe, you look back on it and you realize how rough this blue line was from just a couple of years ago to where we are now, where we actually have such a strong team defensive structure and really just a strong blue line. We'll talk about that coming right up in just a moment, but before we do, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. No one likes to have all this mystery. They want something that's convenient, that's fast, and that shows you all the information in one place. That's where Monarch Money is here. Monarch Money is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. It does the heavy lifting and helps you link all your accounts in minutes so you can see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. It's an all-in-one app. It helps you set goals, and you can even have a shared partner account so that you're always on the same page and you're never apart on your goals. You can always stay lockstep with each other, and of course, again, it's all of these different services in one spot, including tracking maybe your streaming subscription prices, any sort of spending habits on extra goods. Whatever it is, Monarch Money can help you organize it and even save money down the road. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are currently reflecting a little bit on the 2018-2019 Winnipeg Jets season. Feels like a lifetime ago, but it's really not that long ago when you think about it in human years, just about 6 years now. And not exactly the happiest team to remember just because it didn't exactly end well in the playoffs, but we all still have at least a couple of fond memories of a few players. We also had some guys that departed and, maybe a few fans were happy to see. One thing that's definitely true, though, is that even if these guys maybe struggled a bit, there was never a question of effort, and they always put 100% of themselves out there on the ice. One of those guys was Nate Beaulieu, and Beaulieu for me was always, a very entertaining watch is how I would describe it. Beaulieu came from Montreal and Buffalo, and I thought that he was going to pan out and be a solid addition for the Jets, and instead, the version of Beaulieu that we got really struggled to make a positive impact with Winnipeg. He was consistently rotated in and out as like a third pairing guy, and I just thought, I had seen some positive stuff from him in his early NHL career, and what the Jets got was a very different player, and I feel like Winnipeg sort of tried to cast him as a shutdown physical guy, and he was definitely physical, but he didn't really shut players down. Not exactly playing a lot for the Jets when you really look at it. Actually, even by just looking at his record, I was surprised at how few games, relatively speaking, he did play, around 25 to 30 at most per season. And then in the final year of his Jets tenure, he only played about 24 games before moving on to Anaheim for a season. And after that, he kind of piddled around in Switzerland for a season, most recently in the KHL. So he's already taken his services overseas, and probably not too many years left before he might start mulling retirement. He's 32 now, and he's got, I think he has a family, if I recall correctly. So he's had a pretty long hockey career, generally speaking, and I don't know how much he's really going to be playing. He didn't really play a lot in the KHL, just a few games. Maybe there's a chance he comes back and maybe settles down back in North America. We'll have to wait and see. But I think a lot of people really did appreciate that. If nothing else, he was always a very hard worker and somebody who really did try to leave 100% out there on the ice. Similarly, Joe Morrow also came in from, again, another former Hab. This time, though, we knew Morrow as a guy more from his Bruins days. And like the Joe Morrow from Boston was an okay third pairing guy. Winnipeg got, a solid-ish third pairing player, but at his worst, you definitely recall some of those defensive lapses. He also would randomly score like 1 or 2 goals every so often that were just absolute snipes. And it was like, where was this, man? He could absolutely rip one from the point, and every now and again, it actually went in. After he finished his time with Winnipeg in 2018-19, he actually was given a brief AHL stint elsewhere in another system with Binghamton. And then since then, he actually moved overseas and split some time between the KHL, the Liga, the Swiss League, and most recently the EIHL, which this is one of the only players I've seen that's moved to the UK. You don't ever really see too many former NHLers going to the EIHL, but Morrow is still kicking out there. He's playing like 50 odd games a season in the EIHL and apparently racking up quite a few penalty minutes. So I don't know if he's dropping the gloves or what, but it seems like he is still doing quite a bit as it is. And Manchester, that's a pretty cool city to stay, right? If you're going to have, the winding down of your pro hockey career, it'd be pretty darn cool to pick a very interesting European city and get that experience while you're still on the younger side. I know I always say, like, your 30s, you start winding your career down, but in your prime as a person and your ability to have fun and explore, it is still a great age to go out there, live in another city. And like I always say, if these guys can't play here in North America, at least they can go to Europe and have a really unique experience. European hockey is just different, man. It's fun, it's unique, and the crowd atmosphere is always really cool. The last guy didn't actually have too much of a cup of coffee with the big club, but we all remember Cam Schilling more from his Moose days. He spent a lot of time primarily with Hershey and Washington. He actually did get a handful of games with the Caps, but for the most part, really spent a lot of his career as an AHLer. And as a Hershey Bears defenseman and eventually a Moose guy, he did really well in the minor leagues. He was a very, very good top 4 minor leagues defender. And since leaving the Jets org, he had a season back in Hershey and then actually moved to Abbotsford for part of a season. And last couple of years, he was in Sweden for a bit before finishing out his tenure in Salzburg in Austria. And if I recall correctly, after that 23-24 season, he ended up retiring and hanging up the skates. Dude had a really long minor leagues career that I think tends to be a little overlooked. I often have really harped on the importance of building successful cultures at all levels of a hockey organization, and I feel like a guy like Cam Schilling plays a bigger role with that sort of stuff. You think about how good the Bears were for many years, and players like Schilling were on-ice leaders in the room and off the ice too. So, I always feel like that's maybe a little underappreciated. And while I've been disappointed with what the club has done for, this Jets team has done with their main roster this offseason, I have to say that the Moose roster looks really good. I think Winnipeg's AHL team is going to be very successful, and players like Schilling can help, educate some of the younger kids, teach them some of the pro habits, and get them up to speed before they finally hit the big leagues, right? It's, again, a little bit of an underappreciated thing, but something that I would personally endorse for teams that can actually do it. You can't make every AHL team successful because maybe you can't just have all your prospects down there. But for the teams that can do both, it is a very great environment to raise up your youth and prospects and graduate them to hopefully NHL full-time jobs. But yeah, man, the 2018-2019 team, maybe not the most exciting, and definitely you can kind of see why that roster maybe struggled defensively, but at least, we had a playoff appearance and, got to enjoy a few games of that. But let me know what you think about the 2018-2019 team. Do you think fondly of it, or are you kind of in our camp where maybe it was not the happiest end of the season? If nothing else, in the years after that, we eventually got to Bones and Arneal, and what a breath of fresh air that has been for the org. But speaking of, the Arneal era, we have some predictions from JFresh and his model, which I think has generally been pretty accurate for the Jets. I want to talk about where the Jets sit in his range of model outputs and sort of what that means maybe for the upcoming season and whether or not it really seems realistic. We'll chat about that coming right up. But before we do, did want to let you know about our friends and partners at FanDuel. The NFL season is almost here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I've used FanDuel trying to find out, just how many wins I can rack up with the Ravens. Obviously, it has been a little up and down when it comes to the playoffs. But you know what? If you're looking for your MVP pick, whether it's Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, or even you're a Bills fan and maybe you're thinking Josh Allen is going to do it, again, obviously you got a great number of choices. Maybe you want to pick who's going to win the Super Bowl. Well, now is your chance because, again, just a $5 bet. And if you win, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app right now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we're wrapping up with some final thoughts on JFresh's model, which has actually usually been pretty high on the Jets. This is one of the first seasons where we've seen Winnipeg start to slide a bit in his model. And given the offseason, I don't think anyone's really surprised by that. The Jets don't exactly have the best roster ever. I don't want to really, poo-poo it too much, but I think we all know that this year's team is most likely going to take a bit of a step back. Not that I'm actually upset about that. You know me, I've always been in favor of the Jets trying to acquire more talent and younger talent over time, and having a season where maybe you start to get closer and closer to retooling and rebuilding of a sort might not be the worst outcome, right? That said, JFresh's model doesn't think the Jets are going to be that bad. Winnipeg is slated to finish in fourth. I don't really look too much at the specific positioning so much as maybe what it says about how his model is sort of weighting Winnipeg's performances and stuff. The Jets are right behind Utah and just ahead of Minnesota here. So you've got Dallas and Colorado over 100 points. Utah and Winnipeg hovering around the 95-point mark. Minnesota just 1 point off that. And then you've got the rest, Nashville, St. Louis, and Chicago, either below 90 points or really far below in Chicago's case. And so this is kind of an interesting one. I'd say the Pacific actually looks a little high to me. VGK, Edmonton, and LA all at least 100 points. I don't think that's going to happen. I would say that 100 points is likely to be, all three teams more in the Central than it is the Pacific. But the Pacific's also gotten better in some ways, so maybe I'm wrong about this. But I think it's important to see that Winnipeg has definitely had a roster deterioration. And I know people will say, well, it's basically the same team as it was last year. And that's the argument I tend to get on Twitter. I just don't know how people really think about that because to me, I see this team in a totally different light. Swapping out Pearson, Nyquist, and Taves for, the existing injured Lowry temporarily, Ehlers and Appleton. Look, Appleton had his flaws, but he was at least defensively pretty responsible. And Ehlers was a very creative 5v5 force, even if he didn't get that much ice time. Nyquist and Pearson are pretty old nowadays by NHL standards, and neither is playing a very strong defensive game. Nyquist and Pearson can both still shoot the puck pretty well, so in terms of finishing talent, they'll bring that. But I think the team's defensive structure is going to take a bit of a hit. And I'm not sitting here saying that Ehlers was a defensive stalwart. He absolutely was not. But because he was so good at keeping the puck up the ice, you didn't have to worry about that as much. Now the team is going to be older. It's going to be slower. And so, I'm not really shocked that Winnipeg is sliding back. I don't know that it's going to slide back all the way to 94 points necessarily, but I do think that there's going to be a little more margin for error than maybe previous years. So I don't know. Winnipeg being more in that 3 to 4 range, I think is pretty fair. I've had them probably finishing around third in the Central. Dallas, I think, is maybe a little too high. Dallas, his model has them at 110 points. I don't really believe in that, to be honest. I think Glenn Galitzin is not exactly the world's best coach, and compared to DeBoer, I would not say that was an upgrade. So I think the Stars are going to take a step back. Colorado will probably be pretty good, and if Landeskog does stay healthy, that's going to be a huge difference maker for their season. So keep an eye out for that. When Landy came back this past year, he was immediately putting up really strong results, probably some of the best results we've seen from him since before his injury. So, going to be a very interesting year for him. Utah is the one that I think is going to be a real problem for Winnipeg. Last year, Utah was one of the only teams that I would say really stressed the Jets out at 5v5. And I think that's only going to improve now with Utah getting even better. The Mammoth are fast, they're dangerous, and I think they're going to surprise a lot of people. I also feel like he's got the Blues a little low at 87 points. I feel like St. Louis is still going to be a real pain in the butt. If anyone, I think would be slipping down more towards the 80s range, it'd be Minnesota. I think the Wild are going to have a tougher year, and like Kaprizov can only do so much heavy lifting. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Cap has been every time he's on the ice, he's usually one of the best players out there, and he's carried Minnesota to some really crazy results. So maybe he can do it again, but I don't know. I think with Utah and the Blues both improving this offseason, I just don't know how Minnesota can stay up there. Maybe even Winnipeg could find itself fighting for, more of a wild card spot, even with a really big points total. It's going to be a very competitive Central this year, and I think it's going to be really hard for teams that, start to slip early to stay in that playoff bracket. So going to be a weird year for the Jets. And if Winnipeg does somehow miss the playoffs, I'm not really going to be mad about that. Unless the Jets make like a really earth-shattering trade to acquire like a McTavish or something, I just don't think this team's going to be really well situated for the playoffs. One or two trades could really change that. And, if they do make those moves, I'd have a very different perspective on the season. But I'm kind of looking at this year as the transition season I thought last year was supposed to be. You start integrating more youth, you start preparing for these seasons afterwards, and getting yourself in a better spot for that. I think that would be an all right use of the season. Get the kids up to speed, have them contributing early into their careers, start those ELCs now, and get them to be active members of the squad and of this core. Spend a year doing that, and I think you'll be much more situated to figure out what you actually need to trade for in the following summer. So, yeah, going to be an interesting year, good or bad, wherever the Jets finish. I don't know that I'm really going to be too upset either way. I think it'll be fine. If they make the playoffs and do well, awesome. If they don't, you have a really good shot at a major prospect coming into your system, and you might even be able to get some of your own kids some real ice time to get them ready for the future season. So, I'm looking forward to it either way. It's right around the corner. And of course, we have the prospect showcase and stuff coming up in just a couple of weeks. But we'll have to wait and see how all of that pans out. Curious to know your thoughts on that, though. Do you agree with JFresh's model? Do you think the Jets will finish around 3 or 4? Do you think they're too high, too low, or do you think they are just where they should be? Let me know in the comments or at my social medias at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, that's going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we'll recap maybe the 1920 season and continue our offseason coverage. But before we sign off, did want to let you know that it's another big moment at Locked On. College football fans, Locked On and Fire TV present College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation alongside two-time AP Coach of the Year, Gary Patterson, former college star Jesse Holley, and Locked On's local experts. A college football preview only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season, only on Fire TV. As always, thank you so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.